Hello, everyone. My name is Adam Ebert, and I'm a founding member of LitX. LitX is an educational cohort that centers around multiple literacies and helping teachers teach with pop culture. What we've been doing over the summer is putting on some programming in the form of panels on our new YouTube channel. Our panels have a range of topics from music to comics to YouTube and pop culture in general. The panel you are about to watch is called Restocking the Modern Classroom with Pop Culture. And what you'll see the educators on this panel discuss is how pop culture is a necessary element that should be infused into our pre existing curriculum. As the education system evolves, so too must the content, skills, and lessons that are featured in curriculum that students are experiencing every single day. This is an incredibly talented collection of educators and also an amazing discussion that those educators have. Take a look, and I'll see you on the other side.
All right, hello everyone. My name is Adam Ebert. I am a secondary reading teacher from the south suburbs of Chicago. I'm going into my 7th year of teaching in the fall. I've recently started a YouTube channel called Can I Teach It? And I am also a member of the LitX educational cohort who is putting on some educational programming, but our primary focus is to help educators teach with all forms of pop culture, teaching towards all types of literacy. Now, this panel in particular is called Restocking the Modern Classroom with Pop Culture. Now, the premise essentially explores the idea that as our society, our culture, and our media evolve, so too must education and its curriculum. The curriculum that students are exposed to needs to be adapted to them, and often that means bringing in complex text in the form of pop culture. Our panelists today have utilized television, music, video games, comics, graphic novels, Lego, music, and more to engage their students in the learning process. We will discuss the ins and outs of using pop culture in your classroom, some key pieces of pop culture to use, and essentially where to start. So we can start off with some introductions. Adon, do you want to go first?
Yeah, man. Keep it short and simple as always. Adon Alvarado, teacher on the south side of Chicago, English teacher, secondary ed.
All right, Tracy, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, I'm Tracy Edmonds. I was a classroom teacher for many, many years, mostly K2. I'm now a curriculum developer and writer. I'm about to go back to work as a teacher, as a virtual charter school teacher in August. And I'm also the vice president of K-12 Education for Reading with Pictures, which is a nonprofit that promotes and supports the use of comics and graphic novels in education.
Very nice. And Quinn Rollins.
Hey, my name is Quinn. I am a history teacher. I'm in Salt Lake City, Utah. Taught middle school for about 8 years. Was a curriculum writer district tool person for 6 years. And then I've been teaching high school for 3 years. And I wrote a book called Play Like a Pirate, engage students with toys, games, and comics. And that's the kind of stuff I try to do, engage kids using pop culture. And I guess that's why I'm here.
So I'm Zach Hartzman. I'm a high school social studies teacher in New York City. My school year just ended, so I'm now not officially, I still have a whole bunch of other work going on, but on school break. And I teach 11th, currently I teach 11th and 12th grade, although I've taught 9 through 12 over the years. My school, it's an international school in New York City, so it's a public school, but it's a 100% immigrant population, so newly arrived immigrants to New York City who basically, as long as they're under 21, kind of start high school over in order to learn English, since none of my students' native language is English, so they start over, and I teach both content and language together. And over the years, I've incorporated a lot of video games into my practice. I founded Hey Listen Games to make all of my curriculum and lesson plans available for free. Just anyone can go and check out all the curriculum there. I was just chosen as part of the future class as part of the game awards this past year in 2020, which was really cool. And yeah, I think that's the gist of it.
Of course. So I think our first question is to kind of like our elevator pitch is why use pop culture in your classroom? I won't keep it get any more detailed or specific than that. But why pop culture? Why have all of you used pop culture? And where have you seen the benefits? So we can start with Tracy. Do you want to start us off? And also, you can kind of get into like what specific types of pop culture you've utilized.
Gotcha. So it's really about meeting kids where they are and what they already enjoy and bringing that passion of theirs or that enjoyment of theirs into the classroom and into learning. I usually work with little kids. So a lot of cartoons, animation. I love to use comics and graphic novels for little kids. And, right now, I would say the hottest thing with the younger kids is YouTube. So Baby Shark all the way. That's what I would use.
Yeah, I mean, I'll jump in and just say that. So, like, why? I guess it would come down to like three reasons. One, just incorporating things that are interesting to student and teacher alike, right? Like, just bringing in those interesting texts, not only for the students, but texts that the teachers find interesting. Two kind of goes back to Adam and I came through our teaching program together, and a few of us from that cohort always remember what one of our teachers taught us, and it was like, like your students are not all English majors, right? Like they're not all like super excited to dive into some of these novels and to break them down in the way that we enjoy doing it, having majored in English. So I think that's another good reason for why like we should be incorporating a lot of pop culture things that are higher interest, because some of those, like they may not, be super jazzed to jump into some Faulkner or whatever. And then I think it also allows us to place the focus on skills. I think we've, when we teach like, like canonical text or, the traditional text, we get bogged down in these units based on content. Like, oh, we're teaching, whatever, the Gatsby or the, Catcher in the Rye or whatever canonical text you're teaching. When I really think we should be focusing on those skills that are a lot more transferable. And even though we're practicing skills when you're teaching that Great Gatsby unit or whatever it is, by using all these different texts, especially like pop culture texts, like you begin to like place those skills at the forefront of that unit, right? Like you show the students that this is the most important aspect of it. It's not the content. It's not whatever happened in these chapters or whatever. It's this particular skill that you can then use to watch a film or read a poem or, read a short story or check out, or analyze this video game, narrative or whatever it may be. So I think it just places the skills front and center, which I think is, really important.
Well, and I would say kind of both with what you both said. Meeting the kids where they're at includes finding more diverse voices than I can provide from myself. And I find that graphic novels, comics, animation, more and more it is people from diverse communities telling their own stories. The Native American graphic novels I use all have either Native American authors or artists. It's bringing another voice into my classroom besides me as the history teacher, which is just me delivering information. It's a great secondary source for social studies teachers, and I think being able to see those same themes in a historic document and then finding them in pop culture helps the students then take those same themes and see them in the world around them. So it makes history more relevant, it makes geography more relevant, because they see stories coming from other people, not just the dude at the front of the room. Even though the dude at the front of the room is really smart, I gotta say.
Agreed. Yeah, and so obviously some great arguments for why to bring pop culture into your classroom. It always seems like when before we started this panel, we were kind of talking about things we're interested in, things we're passionate about, and I think it's never been a second thought of bringing those things that we love into our classroom, because a lot of times That's what's worked for us. Whether we're, Adon, the thing that always rings true with me is like, we're not teaching English majors. We are the atypical ones as teachers in general. But making it work for our students is coming from a place that still we know, but kind of connecting those two things. So let's talk about kind of experiences, and what has been your experiences using pop culture. And the kind of question that I'll tack on is response to. How have students responded? How have parents responded? How have administrators responded? You can kind of throw those in as you see fit. So what has been your experience, and what has been the response? And actually, Adon, do you want to start us off with this one?
Yeah. So students, I mean, it's pretty simple. They're always excited because it's relevant, right? It's like text that they're familiar with, that they enjoy, that they like. So they're always completely on board. Obviously, like there's hits there's hits and misses. You use something that, kind of falls flat. That's cool. You move on to the next thing, but they tend to just really enjoy it. As far as their parents, so far, pleasantly, most parents have been like super excited about it. The ones that actually talk to me about it, and I think for them too, it's because a lot of times it's text that they may have engaged with recently, or that they can start engaging with their student or with their kid, as opposed to like if we're using like older, again, canonical text. It's like, oh, I kind of remember reading that in high school, as opposed to something they can engage with like right now. So like I know what the parent teacher conferences we had like in the fall, like I had a parent who was like, yo, like you guys are watching like Hentified in class. Like my daughter and I just finished watching that, this summer. We loved it. I'm so glad you guys are watching it. It's such a great show. So like we just started talking about that, like over one of the texts that we were looking at. Another one was like Black Lightning. Like a parent was like, you guys are watching Black Lightning. Well, Mom, we just started talking about that in the parent teacher conference. So like the parents are just completely on board with it for the most part. I have not had, a parent, not be excited about us using pop culture text. Administration is kind of like hit or miss. Some of them have gotten it and they've just been like, yo, this is dope. Like, I'm glad you guys are doing this. Like the students love it. Like this is the stuff that we need to be doing. And then I've had other administrators, at various levels who are like, well, does this appear on a test? Right? Like what's the purpose of teaching this? So it's kind of hit or miss with that. I think we'll see, like, as we get, further into this conversation that so much kind of hinges on standardized tests, from funding and school report cards and all these other things, that's always going to be kind of an obstacle for some. But I think there's ways around it. So that's what I'd say about that in terms of reception.
I'll go ahead and jump.
Yeah.
For me, a lot of my use of pop culture has been, we mentioned graphic novels, and I do that. I have in all 4 quarters for my U.S. history, we have graphic novels selected. One's about immigration. There's some about Native Americans, World War I, and then civil rights. And those are sort of the highlights. Those are like the tent poles of the reading and writing components of the class for those quarters. A lot of my other stuff, I do things like having kids design action figures and building things out of Lego, designing like NBA and NFL uniforms and teams. And it is really, I targeted the least sexy US history topics and sort of infuse the pop culture into them.
Mm-hmm.
So the Great Depression, as much as I think it's like amazing and I love it, it's harder to reach kids just using a history book or just using the primary sources, just using traditional Great Depression social studies stuff. And so by bringing in the pop culture, which includes those NBA uniforms, it includes action figures, it includes music, includes Lego, it's like that's the way to reach them. And what I see is they get more engaged, they do more of the work, they are submitting more of the work, some of them ask for additional work, and So if they like coming to class, they're going to learn more than if it's a chore. And that's one of the most valuable things about using pop culture that I've seen.
I'm
Yeah,
Tracy. I was gonna say
yeah,
some
I'll
of your
jump in
experience.
because I work with much younger students than you all do. Um, I've seen pop culture really draw kids in and get them working, like Adon says, on those skills that they might otherwise could care less about. You know, when you have kids that want to play with Legos and they want to run around on the playground, they're not really excited about sitting down to write something. So bringing in something that they already love, their favorite animated show, their favorite YouTube video, their favorite toy, and asking them to draw and write about those things. Obviously, they're going to be much more interested in doing that, and they're going to have a lot more to say when you do that. Also, I'm working with kids that are in the real early stages of literacy. And for a while, I was a reading specialist, and I worked with a group of kids who really had almost no literacy at all. They didn't know their letter sounds. They didn't know, they didn't understand how print worked at all. And these were kids from like third to fifth grade. So these are not the little tiny ones. And I made graphic novels and comics a big part of what we did. It was very easy to help them understand sequence and left to right and what happens next and those kind of things. And they could read stories even if they couldn't read the text. We could practice all kinds of story skills like character and plot and development because they could understand the stories, and they felt more comfortable reading those books than they did a little kid book that has 3 words on a page. So if you give them Owly, if you give them something else that doesn't look like a little kid book, but it doesn't have as many words in it, they're much more comfortable with that. I remember one kid in particular, I'll never forget him. The first book he ever sat down and opened and read on his own was a toon book for first level readers, and he came to me afterwards jumping up and down. I read the book, I read the book, I read the book. So for me, comics in particular are a really great vehicle for bringing those kids to literacy.
And then, Zach, your experience using pop culture. I know you've specifically talked about video games, but what has been your experience with that? And then response from students, parents, and admin.
Yeah, so I mean, even beyond video games, when I originally was going to be a teacher, I knew I wanted to use comics. I even like one of my professors in grad school was adamant about finding ways to bring in comics and graphic novels. And I grew up reading comics, so I knew it was something that I wanted to bring into my classroom, especially when I landed. So I've been at the same school my whole career. I student taught at the school I'm in and just continued working there since. And since it is all my students are non-native speakers, I wanted to use comics as because I always look for different types of mediums and access points for my students to grapple with language. And something that a lot of people do naturally when they're reading in their native language is that you can kind of visualize what's happening in the text, right? You don't actually need to think about visualizing, it just kind of happens. Whereas for non-native speakers, that can be much more challenging. You're kind of just focused on translation. So I found with comics, it kind of like does the legwork in terms of visualizing what's happening. You still kind of still need to play around and visualize what's happening in between panels, but it does a lot of the legwork in letting them focus more on translating rather than like picture what's happening. And it went really well. My admin has always been super supportive. I've never really had any pushback for any of the comics I've used. Every year I try to find at least one. My favorite, I think, so far was probably when I used Persepolis when I taught world history. But now in my U.S. history class, I like to use X-Men God Loves Man Kills when during my civil rights unit, and it's always fantastic. And from there, because I'm passionate about comics, it kind of like when we're passionate about stuff, our students like get passionate about it. It's like contagious. So when I originally saw that what I was doing was working with comics, like, okay, I need to bring in video games since that's my other passion, what I'm doing most of my spare time. And those lessons are always great. I've never had like a stinker with a gaming lesson. I mean, there's a lot of prep time that goes into it to make sure that it's going to work out well. But every single time, it's just like among the most fun and engaging lessons of the year. I'm in a unique, when it comes to parents, it's a unique situation where my students' parents are the most trusting people I've ever met. They come like they're just like, you're teaching my kids, you're teaching them English, do whatever you need to do that. So like regardless of what I'm teaching in my class, I've literally never had a question or a parent question what I was doing, luckily.
Yeah, I would say the only pushback I've ever gotten has been from a school librarian, because the kids always wanted to check out like Garfield and the Dumb Bunnies, and she would tell them, you have to get a real book. And so she and I had a lot of conversations about what is reading and what counts as reading and why. And I will say by the end of the year, she had relaxed her standards quite a bit on what counts as real reading, and she didn't actually let them go for it all the time, but she would let them take one book that was a graphic novel and another book that was text. So I counted that as a win.
Yeah, the librarian in my school has been so wonderful. It's now like an entire graphic novel and comic section, and she just told me that she's now getting a grant to get a bunch of Nintendo Switches in the library. So it's like everything that I've been advocating for the years in that building, she's now setting it all up. It's great.
Yeah, and I mean, you're seeing the students pick those up, right? That I think the graphic novels section, the manga section in particular, I know has exploded at our school, and that's something that students burn through. Like it'll be like, a kid in third period has, a My Hero Academia volume 2, and then by the next day, like they picked up 3, 4, and 5 because they are like, I don't want to go back to the library, that soon to get the next volume. So, and it I know, Zach, you mentioned there have been stinkers. I've seen my own stinkers. I know a lesson. It's always interesting because I've used lessons that Adon has written, and Adon has often sold them better to his students. Because I remember I looked at Johnny Cash's cover of Hurt for tone, and I didn't sell it to my students. I didn't give them the proper context so that when they heard it, they were like, Mr. Ebert, this is a country song. And I was like, it's not a country song quite. I gave them enough background, but they were not, they couldn't have that connection where I know Adon talked about that the lesson went really well for him and his kids got it. And so sometimes it's selling it to your kids and seeing where it goes over, where I know I've used, I use the opening sequence from Baby Driver to talk about suspense and how suspense is built. And I think I used 2 clips from Jurassic Park to talk about how those directors are building suspense and working with the cinematographers and working with the composers and working with the actors to build suspense. And I know that opening scene of Baby Driver, like not only did the work really turn out in how the students, noted how Edgar Wright and his team were building suspense, but also they were like, can we watch that again? Because I didn't have like my projector speakers. Like I brought like my own amp and some like bookshelf speakers. So it sounded really good, especially because it's like music driven. So sometimes and I think that again, the Hurt lesson not working is because I didn't sell them on it. I didn't really give them what they were in for. But there's been other things where sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. But I think it's all about the intentions and the goals. So I talked about a couple of specific pieces of pop culture. I think that's where we can go next is what have been your standout pieces of pop culture that you've used? What has really worked? What has been, the content for effective lessons? What's really, resonated with your students in particular, and why? So what have been, and this is where, teachers, as you're watching, you can, jot these all down, but, what have been the standout pieces of pop culture that have worked for you or worked, for your students, and why do you think those worked? We can start with Zach, if you want to start us off with this question. What have been the standout pieces? I know you mentioned a couple graphic novels, but what have been the other standout pieces of of pop culture for you?
Yeah, so I haven't, because now I've taught like a different curriculum almost every single year, so I've not often been able to reteach things that I've made. But when I did, when I was still teaching world history, I I showed my students Schindler's List, and also Saving Private Ryan is just like one side focused on the Holocaust. One side just focused more on combat and the war side of it. And they were enthralled. By now, I know those movies are more mature. I can get away with it because I'm in high school and because my students are older. When I was when I was teaching ninth grade, I could have students who were 18 to 20. So I could get away with using more mature films like that. But those were phenomenal. It is still amongst like the best conversations I've had with my students and over the years. Now my favorite one of the things I do teach now is I have an elective class where we focus on video games as literature. And basically all the skills that they're learning in their ELA classes, we just take the same thing and apply it to games. And two games that I always play with them in these classes are Gone Home and What Remains of Edith Finch. And they're two indie games. Whenever I use video games, I like to use smaller ones that take between 2 to 5 hours to complete. Just kind of like a movie. It's just we can't spend so much class time playing a gigantic game, but a small, like narrative heavy, story driven experience is always great. And those two games in particular, very accessible, not super demanding controls wise, and they're just two like prime examples of like where gaming has gone, right? Like now, they're both Gone Home is almost 10 years old now, but to see where games used to be and where they are now, and how we have these really like beautiful stories being told in these independently made video games, and every single year those two games are the standouts. Like my students, like I have them write reviews as one of the activities, where as if they're writing for a publication, they write a review on the game, and that's always their favorite thing to do is reviewing these two video games.
All right. Quinn, some of the standouts for you in terms of pop culture.
I've already mentioned the graphic novels. The other things that I think, well, I'll go with the biggest win from this last year. Is fourth quarter is our civil rights unit, and I had them design action figures earlier in the year. In March or April, we came back and they designed their own Funko Pop figures using templates. And I have U.S. history Funko Pops in my classroom, but it's like there have been two series, and it's like you have JFK and Jackie and Abraham Lincoln and George Washington and Benjamin Franklin, Rosie the Riveter, Jimmy Carter, Ronald Reagan, and Uncle Sam. So it's like the whitest version of American history possible. And so, as part of our civil rights unit, they were making a pitch to Funko. Here are 4 additional characters you could work into your next series of American history Funko Pop. And the requirement from me was just that it be from some underrepresented group who's somebody you don't hear enough about in history books. We're in fourth quarter of a US history class. Who have I missed? Whose stories aren't being told that you think deserve to be told? And so that has been the thing that kids get into most, but also the thing that has them connect history with the world around them. And it's via toys, it's via pop culture, but it makes them reconsider the world around them and also what's being sold to them as consumers. If they're kids and they're going to buy a movie or a toy or something, it's like, what's available to them and why? And there's just a lot of deeper thinking happening than is evident from them just designing a toy. It shows a deeper level of analysis, I think, than they'd get if I gave them, okay, here's a 5-paragraph essay, tell me the same thing. They get it in a different way, I guess.
Yeah, and I know Zach, you talked about it. Quinn, you just talked about that. There's transferable skills there, right? That Zach, you're finishing up a Gone Home lesson or unit with having them write a review for that. Same thing, Quinn. You're having them write to Funko. Like these are artifacts that they need to be creating. They're transferable skills, and all while it's not, the pop culture is kind of working as the chocolate covered vegetables in that regard. So yeah, great stuff.
I'm gonna steal
Tracy.
that lesson next year, Quinn.
It's yours.
I'm ending the year next year with the Civil Rights Unit. I'm stealing it.
Bring it. I will deliver it in person if you want.
Yeah.
Tracy, some of your, or no, Adam, whoever wants to go next with their standout.
I was just saying that Funko Pop lesson is dope. That's a really cool lesson. I mean, I would just say music in general. I think kids really like talk about music. So like sometimes we'll do stuff where they have to make a case for like who are going to be the 3 most influential musicians moving forward. So it's all about them just making an argument and defending it, and kind of some evaluation in there as well when they decide to pick like whatever song it is that they want to pick up or choose as like this artist's song that represents them more than any other. We've done stuff with like Hanif Abdurraqib has this really cool essay where he makes analogies between musicians and Disney sidekicks. So we always have students do that too. Like, what did he get wrong here? So like, there's always like a counterpoint, and then also it's like new analogies that they make. But 2, I'll take Quinn's method and talk about 2 that I think were really like, well received this past year, and that's Apple TV's got a TV series called Little America, and it's just each episode focuses on like a true life story about the immigrant experience from people from all over the world coming to America. And there was one, I mean, they liked almost all the ones that we watched. I think we watched like 4 of them. But one that really stood out only because like immediately after watching it was this one titled The Cowboy. It's about a Nigerian immigrant coming to America and going to college. And like the day that we watched it, I get like an email like when I get home. And the premise of the episode is this Nigerian student, he's kind of here and he's kind of shell-shocked by the culture, and he hates hamburgers and like what we do to our food, and he's studying to become an economist. And I get an email from a student, and she sends me this meme. It's like the Drake Hotline Bling meme, and the first part's like it's got like the character's name on it, and it's like hamburgers where Drake's going like that, and then at the bottom it's like stability of the economy in developing countries, and the guy's like that, and she's got the character's name on there, and I was just like, yo, like that's dope, right? Like she sees this episode and she runs off and she like felt like she wanted to like create something that was fun and cool, and that she understood what was going on in the episode. So that was really cool. I just think it's a really good show. Well done. It's bite sized because 25 minutes and you're done with that. And students just tend to like real life stories, true events. And the other one would be Bingo Love. We read that this past semester, like in the last like month of school. And like it was crazy. Like we read a bunch of comics all throughout the school year, but this is the first one. Like we read comics every Thursday, basically. And this is the first one, like because it's a little bit longer that we broke into parts. I think we had like 3 parts, and it was the first one where they were immediately like, "Yo, we reading Bingo Love?" I was like, we're not reading that till next Thursday again, right? Like we'll read part 2 next Thursday, and it'd be like Friday, and then it'd be Monday, like we finishing Bingo Love. I was like, nah, dude, we're not reading again till Thursday. So they like loved that story, dude. They were all about it. The write-ups that they had afterwards were great. So I would say those are 2 that I think like worked recently. I'd also just give a really quick shout out before going to Tracy to the film Warrior by Gavin O'Connor, because students love that film. It's like the perfect film to just teach film literacy and the language of film, because it's rich with the cinematography and its use of music and sound, and it's got a little something for everybody, because there's students who are always like, I didn't think I'd like this because it sets it up as something to do with like the UFC, but then there's just like so much family drama and it's so much heart, and Nick Nolte puts in an Oscar nominating performance. It's just a brilliant film. So that's another one. But Tracy,
it's funny to be with the 3 of you that are working at a completely different place than I am, because I'm working with much younger kids. I would say one of my favorite things to use with the really young kids is Owly. It's a series of books, graphic novels, comics, about a little owl and his little worm friend. And it's just recently been reissued in color from Scholastic, and they've added a little more text to it. But some of the characters speak in icons and some of the characters speak in text. And I have found that to be great for literacy for little guys, because they can read the icons, and they get so excited because they can actually read them. And it also teaches some really great social emotional skills about friendship and getting along and getting to know people who are different from you are and all those kind of things. So I really like that book. Getting slightly older, there's a series called Science Comics from First Second that is just, the line is expanding like crazy, but there's a whole bunch of different topics. So there's one about bats, there's one about the brain, there's one about robots and drones, and those are really good. And they're more extensive and more in depth than you would think for the age range that they're aiming at. They're really good. And if you have kids that are interested in any of those subjects, they eat those things up, and they want to read them over and over and over again. The Arrival is a book by Sean Tan. It's a wordless book. Quinn's face. It's a wordless sequential art book that really puts you into the immigrant experience, even if you haven't experienced that before, because he creates a new world that none of us are familiar with, and shows a man who immigrates to this new world and how he's trying to figure out what to do because he can't understand anything that's going on. And so I would say that's another really great book. I actually asked Scott McCloud, who's a famous comics expert, what book would you give people if they've never read a comic or a graphic novel before? And he said The Arrival. A, they won't rely on the words. They have to read the pictures. And B, it's one of the most beautiful books you've ever read. So that one's a biggie. Outside of comics, which is sort of my realm, I would say, and this works, gosh, for a lot of ages, is a series, animated series called City of Ghosts. I don't know if any of you have read it, about different neighborhoods in LA. And that's really great. It would work from little kids all the way to adults, talking about community and talking about whose voices matter in a community and how people get along with each other. And so I think that's another really great one you could use.
Yep. Yeah. City of Ghosts is fantastic. And I think it's fantastic. And I wish more people knew about it, because I think there's nothing else like it. And it's beautiful and it's funny and it's just, I love City of Ghosts so much. So next question, because I think we got two more questions and we'll wrap things up. Where do we see things going from here? So I think all of us have a great deal of experience teaching with pop culture. It's something that I knew, inspired by two of my teacher friends, Eric Callenborn and Ron L. Whitaker, who were teaching with comics, among other things, in their classrooms, and from the guidance of some professors in college, and working in tandem, kind of being in school in tandem with the Don. Like, it was never there was never a doubt in my mind that this was something I could and should be doing. But I still think there's progress. I still think there's, when there's mention of using pop culture, whether that's a comic, a graphic novel, a film clip, or, a song, like, there's still, it doesn't seem like it's so widely accepted. And Zach, I'm always intrigued by the stuff you're doing with video games, because I it seems like something I really want to do, but you're a great voice to have, because you're kind of showing how it's done and showing what it can be, and I appreciate that. But so I think, where in general do you all see pop culture in education going? What is the future of pop culture? And that could be, again, the specific things. Where might things change? Where could things change? Where do you want things to change for the better? So Zach, I guess we could start with you. Where do you see the future of pop culture and education?
I think it's becoming way more common. When I was in high school, there was no pop culture in any of my classes. I'm sure that's a common experience with most of us and just most people in general. But as the years have gone on, I've seen more teachers using comics, especially comics and graphic novels. I feel have come such a long way. Like, these past 10 years, they went from being nowhere to being in most school library. So I'm in New York City, so it's also, I can't speak to every single experience, but almost every single New York City library I've seen has now comics, manga, and graphic novel section, which is just so cool, because now I can actually talk with my students about it constantly. It is on the gaming side, there's still ways to go. It's still new, right? I feel like gaming and game-based learning now is kind of where comics were like 10 years ago. Um, there have been people doing it for a while now. I'm not the first person to use video games in the way that I am. But it's definitely becoming more commonplace. I'm getting emails and Twitter messages from people constantly asking like, okay, this is my first time doing it. Which game do you recommend? I'm gonna teach this unit, and it's there are so many people open to trying it. So I do like 10 years down the line, we're gonna start seeing gaming be, especially with the rise of esports, like so many schools are now also getting esports teams and video game clubs. So it's becoming way more commonplace even like this upcoming year over remote learning. I know a lot of people reached out to me looking for different ways to engage students over remote learning, and I did use games as one of the many different things that I had to do and change this past year. Um, but like I'm hopeful for it. I do see a lot of I know other teachers who are starting to create their own elective classes similar to how I did, where they're going to start looking at video games as literature. So it's just cool. Like I wish I was a student now, or like these upcoming years, because it's like so many like it was there are so many opportunities now at least where I am where it was I would have it was a dream. Like it was things like teachers didn't talk to you about these things. I had one teacher in high school who would talk to me about Call of Duty, and that's all. He just played Call of Duty, but that was something, right? We would talk for hours about Call of Duty just because that was something we could relate to. um but now we're seeing it like everywhere. Like Marvel is like common. Like you could talk to anyone about Marvel. That wasn't a thing when any of us were kids. You couldn't talk to teachers about Marvel, right? But now it's everywhere. It's really cool.
Tracy, your hopes for pop culture in education in the future?
Yeah, I think there are a couple things that are happening that are really positive and hopeful. And one is the diversity of voices and experiences that are now starting to be represented in comics, in animation, in film. You know, it's growing steadily, and there with that, it gives teachers more choice. So you can, you know, it used to be here's the canon, you have to read these books, and your kids will. We don't have to do that anymore. We're spoiled for choice. There are so many things out there. Like Don said, if you want to teach a skill, you have a lot of choices on how you can do it, and you can tailor it to what your students are going to be interested in. You can tailor it to works that represent them and their voices, and they can create their own as well. And when they see a model, you know, of a professional creator making something about someone like them, they feel more able to create their own work as well. So I would say that, yeah, having more choice and more diversity is really going to continue to be the real important piece of this.
Quinn, your hopes for the future of pop culture and education?
I think when Tracy shared her story about her school librarian sort of opening her mind a little bit to allow kids to check out one graphic novel if they got another text of some kind, that that's what I want to see. I don't want to see classrooms just be all pop culture all the time. I think that there are skills that you can learn that will cross over between pop culture and a more traditional education. I don't think we should throw out all the old ways, but I think if we're ignoring video games and music and toys and comic books, if we're ignoring that, we're ignoring a lot of our students' real world. They don't leave my classroom and go home and read history textbooks. You know, they go home and they play video games. They play with Legos. And I teach 11th graders, and they do. They go home and they play with Legos. They play Minecraft. But then if you show them, you can be exploring history while you're doing these things. You can be exploring the real world around you while you're doing these things. It's just another way for that light to turn on. And so what I would hope to see moving forward is more people like Tracy's librarian that have are set in their ways maybe that open that door just a little bit to let something new in.
Yeah, no, and I think Quinn, the what I love in your work is that again, that passion, right, that you're bringing in to show that, like, you know, all of us go home and, we go home and read the history text sometimes, but we also go and build Lego. Like, that was something, that's something I still want to do, and that's something I know I love to do with my daughter, right? And that's something that, again, we can show our students that doesn't just stay at our house, that there has a place for it, and that it has transferable skills. And I think something else you brought up is, it's not, pop culture is not the end all be all, right? The way I always sell it is, it's, you're using it as an opportunity to connect the new to the known, and create all these different pathways for students in their learning experiences, and build more complex and more, I think, authentic, often, learning experiences. So I think that's a great point that you brought up, in terms of, again, pop culture is not the replacement. It is the not even supplement. It is working hand in hand with a lot of our pre-existing curriculum. Adon, where do you see the future of education and pop culture?
I don't know, man. To be honest, I mean, I'd like to say that I would like to see pop culture. I know you guys are a little more tempered, but I'd like to see it become the dominant form in the classroom, because I think so many of those old ways of doing things are still necessary, only because so much of how we determine whether a student's prepared or not, or whether or not they're worthy of going to this college, or whether or not a school is going to get funded, is entrenched in those old way of doing things. And the assessments that lead to the funding, that lead to, SAT scores and all those things, are entrenched in old texts, and having to teach that text in order to do well on this thing that is so singular and so minuscule in regards to what a student can actually do and what they should actually be able to do when they leave. That I think, while most teachers would love for it to become the dominant form and are encouraged to do so just because of the way we consume culture now as a society, that still will be stemmed a bit by, people who are still not moving ahead because it's simpler and cheaper to do it the old way. It's surprising just how comfortable people feel and how much time and energy they put into preserving the status quo. So that worries me at times, but I also look around and see the things that people are doing. I'm on panels with people like this, super talented, passionate educators who are just killing it. So when I see that, I'm like, yeah, like, this is good. But still worry a bit, to be honest. But I'm excited for it. I'm excited for it, and I'm hopeful. So that's what I'll say.
Okay. So I think we've hit our end point here. The thing I really want to wrap up with really quickly is your one sentence piece of advice for a teacher who wants to incorporate pop culture, whether that, again, is they're passionate about Funko Pops, they're passionate about Lego, they're passionate about graphic novels, video games, animation. What is your one piece of advice for someone who hasn't but wants to incorporate pop culture into their classroom? And we could do last name alphabetical order. So we'll start with Adon. What's your one piece of advice?
Yeah, all right. So I'm going to plug here, and I'm going to plug our, talented moderators YouTube channel. Should I teach it, right? Or can I teach it? Sorry. But I think the process that you go through on your channel is kind of what we should be doing with pop culture, right? Like, you find this thing that you like, you ask yourself, like, why do I like this thing? Where does it fit in? What skills can I teach? And then you can start going through the process of, like, how would I teach this thing? What kind of lessons might I come up with? What skills am I assessing? What's the final assessment? What activity, what project-based, activities can I come up with? And I think you do all that really well on your channel. And then at the end you say, all right, is this something that I should teach? Is it something that I can teach? Is it worthwhile? Is it worth my students' time? Is it going to get to where I need to go? Is it teaching them the skills that they need to learn? So I think that's the thing. I think, watch your channel, dude. That's a plug for my homie here, because it's great. That's an excellent resource. And I think it shows you a great process by which, all educators should be going through when deciding, what kind of pop culture they want to implement in their classroom. So that's what I'll throw out there.
Thank you, homie. I'm very flattered that you said that. Tracy, what's your one piece of advice?
Student voice and choice matters. What students love and what they're passionate about is important, and that's going to bring them to the learning. So, you know, their experience is important and should be honored.
All right, perfect. Zach, your one piece of advice for educators.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, ask for help. It's fine, right? I'm sure, like, and I know people are somewhat reserved about social media sometimes, but like there are thousands of teachers on Twitter who will respond to you if you ask for help. It's like I've spoken to so many wonderful people through Twitter specifically, so many wonderful educators through Twitter specifically that have helped me in many different ways, pop culture, not pop culture. But ask for help, ask other educators for help. Like Tracy said, ask your students for help. You've got a lot of experts right there, just like waiting to help you. Yeah, that's it.
All right, and then Quinn, your word to your piece of advice for educators.
Mine would just be, what would you like in your classroom? If you were a kid, would you want to be in your own classroom? If you are a teacher, which you are, chances are good. What do you want to do in your classroom? I know the days that I'm doing pop culture stuff, I'm more relaxed. I'm having more fun. The kids are having more fun. And it doesn't necessarily mean pop culture. If you're passionate about travel, use your travel. If it's cooking, use cooking. If it's running, then use running. If it's lying about saying you love running, do that. But just find whatever it is that excites you, that makes you happy, bring some of that into your classroom. For us, it's comics and toys and games. It might be something else for you, but if it makes you happy, it'll make your classroom a better place. Kids will learn more.
100%. I always tell my students that I hate running, but you know, I think you need to sell it to them too. All right. So this has been an amazing panel. I appreciate all of my panelists. I will link in the video description all of their social media that you can follow them and reach out with whatever questions you might have. Again, this panel has been part of the summer programming from LitX. You are watching this on our YouTube channel, so please be sure to like, share, and subscribe. Check out some of the other videos on our channel, and take care, everyone. We'll see you soon.
All right, so thank you again to Tracy Edmonds, Quinn Rollins, Zachary Hartzman, and Adon Alvarado for an incredible discussion on how you can infuse your classroom with pop culture. Please be sure to subscribe to our LitX YouTube channel, as well as following LitX on Twitter at WeAreLitX. Take care, everybody, and we'll see y'all soon.